May we please get settled? And sithuleni sithixwaga. We are back into the session, comrades. We are back into plenary. May we please keep quiet and so that we can follow the program and deal with the matters of the day. Marabo bani laba sakhuluma manqabani? All right, comrades, as I said that we are going to change the program as and when it is necessary to do that. We are now going to allow Dr. Padili Hutla to come forward and give us the strategic insight on how the society views the ANC. Sometimes, comrades in mind, comrade delegates, then after Comrade Padi, we are going to have credentials. No. I need to listen from you. Can I get information of what person? Comrades, may I please call upon Dr. Padili Hutla to give us an insight on how the society views the ANC. It's important for us to know how the society views us, over and above us doing an introspection to ourselves. So, Kitlafa Ntateli Hutla, and after Ntateli Hutla, it's over the credentials. If you could just keep quiet, comrades, please. If you could just keep quiet so that we are able to finish the program. All right. Thank you very much. Tatel Hutla, over to you.
Yes. Thank you.
Don't worry about your computer. I'm going to fix it from there. We're trying to see if we can get a mic for you.
Oh, okay. Risky.
Just check if it's touching. One of them doesn't work.
Thank you very much. I know that we are still connecting.
Ask them to control it for you.
Yes, I'll run from here and then we'll run. Yes, yeah. Thank you very much. I am forced to sleep on two beds with a partner, which makes life quite difficult because the presentation will be controlled from there while I speak from here. so that it can project over there. I feel very much privileged that I've been asked to come and address you. It's a very rare privilege. I had one such in Mangaung where I addressed 7,000 people, which was your conference. Then I was the statistician general. And I blended very well in there because I was dressed in yellow. And I felt quite great that way. But the problem that I felt and severely felt afterwards was after the cheering and everything, I was keenly aware that my message had not sunk. And I still suspect even today, my message may not sink. And I really have to say that let the message sink. Because South Africa is too important, not only for South Africa, but for the continent, including my own country, Lesotho, where if things go wrong here, they terribly go wrong in Lesotho. I am born and bred in Lesotho and educated there. South Africa is my country, and I've naturalized here. So these two countries are very important to me. So I hope that we are able to project there. But brought up in the Christian tradition, the challenge that I have is one of not withholding good for those to whom it is due when it is in your power to know. And when I make this message, it's for that deep reason that I believe that the message I have is one that you should know and act upon, or choose to act upon. I have titled my presentation, The Era of the Idiot. Because it's only when you are an idiot, when you put across a message for yourself and fail to act on it. Only idiots do that. And I'll demonstrate how collectively, as a country, we have been idiots, and what we need to do to get out of this idiotic conduct. Because if we still color this thing and say it is that, we will never get out of this. It's 28 years down the line, and poverty is creeping and grinding. We cannot be polite to poverty, we cannot be polite to inequality, and we cannot be polite to unemployment. All those need the rudest words that we have to use. And that is why I'm saying the era of the idiot. I don't know whether you are, I don't see my presentation there. Okay, while we give it a minute, I need to refer to the crystal ball in 2008 of government. And that was captured in the Future We Chose scenario 2025 by ourselves as government officials, and government officials in the government of the ANC. And this built on the work of the scenario 2014. And I'll go through these scenarios very briefly and say what did we choose and what has it resulted in? And perhaps how do we move from there to a different futures? I see that my presentation is not showing, but you see, the key questions that government asked in 2008 were around the shifts in global economic power and China becoming a very big power, shifts in political power in South Africa as key driving forces, the resource constraints that confronted us, South Africa's economic growth, governance, and social fabric. I'm afraid on all 6 of them, we have failed dismally. Now, the scenarios were: 1, not yet Uhuru, Nkalakatha and Mubango. Under the not yet Uhuru scenario, there would be a government strongly committed to accelerating economic growth, and that struggles in the face of deteriorating global conditions and severe ecological challenges. Under that scenario, the conclusion was me first, you later. The have-lots versus the have-nothings, black power, white money, and the earth lies screaming. That is under not yet Uhuru. Under the Nkalakata scenario, we are determined to play a more central role in the economy as government, and government prioritizes poverty reduction and skills enhancement by articulating a national vision and fostering partnerships. The end game in that scenario was the dreamers becomes the doers, one nation, one destiny, the environment matters too, and time to bite the bullet. Under the Mubango scenario, you can run the screen, that yellow is too much. Bang goes the boom. Despite an initial resurgence of the economy and positive wealth conditions, the government battles to govern. And under that scenario is bang goes the boom, politicians versus politician, the champ slips up, and the brink of a new era. Now, with these scenarios, I have to say we have ended on the Mubango scenario, the worst case scenario, with our eyes wide open. And then under the bang goes the boom, in the slipstream of the 2009 election and a successful 2010 World Cup, that's where we were, the economy boomed a little bit, breached the 5.5%, it never did. It never reached 5.5% in terms of our thoughts. But the euphoria, what is true is the euphoria was short-lived, as poor planning and coordination, exacerbated by political infighting, started taking their toll on the economy. Politician versus politician, it's about service delivery suffering and corruption increasing, as animosity among politicians reaching starting new levels. Efficiency levels declined as measured by unqualified audits. Proportion of budget spent and citizens' satisfaction survey come to this. Under the champ slips up is the economy after a few good years was on the skids. Foreign multinationals and private equity funds began cherry-picking key South African assets. South Africa's proportion of continental GDP declined to such an extent that by 2025 the country lost its unraveled preeminence on the continent. We were number one in 1996 on the continent. Nigeria and Egypt surpassed us. Not only purchasing power parity GDP, but in nominal GDP, they've actually surpassed us. Not because they were doing miracles, but because we slept on the job. Brink of a new era, standing at the edge of a cliff, a new ANC went back to the nation humbly and demonstrated signs of revival of idealism. This is where you are now, as the ANC, that's where we are. Are we actually standing there and creating a revival of a new idealism? And are we humbly saying so? Or are we saying, we said it before, don't tell me because I said it first? Is that what we are? Because most of the time, I've heard the ANC saying, we said it first ourselves. It's not about you said it first yourselves. It's about how society sees you and says it however many times they wish, and without any retribution. You cannot be discomforted by the society when it says to you, you have messed up. Now, here is Nelson Mandela talking, and I'm the one there he was helping us release the census results, and he talks to the matter of education. I don't know whether this speaker will get to this place to talk to us. I'll try and play what he said. Oh, there's no voice. I can't even hear it myself. but so you can play it there. Oh, it's not loud enough. Okay, I'll play it here, but I need to get onto my computer. Oh yes, I think it was. Oh my God, BBT is here for you. So I criticize you, must criticize me too. Yes, I wanted to come here. Now, okay, I'll go to. I wanted to go on to slideshow, yes, and then play.
But what is the position with the blacks in this country, with Africans, Kannada, and Indians? In most cases, they were excluded from schools. To say even less of tertiary education, because you did not have the facilities. You could not go to the best schools in the country, which are well equipped to enable you to grasp sophisticated concepts of food. And the environment between the school and the home was totally different. You come to parents, some of whom have never seen the inside of a school.
That situation continues to this day, 28 years into democracy. That we come to parents, some of whom have not seen the inside of the school. And apartheid was anchored on two things, land and education. These matters of education have not been adequately addressed. The only sin that these children have made is to seek to go to school. And their teacher has to help them to cross the river instead of helping them in learning. This is where we are today. This is a symbolic part of it. The reality is equally so. And they block the roads to say now enough is enough, we want education. What we are seeing here is progression ratios of ourselves over time. And on the left panel, we show all of us have grade 1. Whites, blacks, and Indians have grade 1 now. And progress, is it not so? It is. Because now we all have grade 1. I don't have a pointer. Yes, I need a stick. Not to beat anybody. Oh yes, there's a cursor. Yes. You see, but it's a cursor for me, not for the person who is sitting there.
She must use the cursor.
Yeah, the cursor is not working now. But you can see the left panel. All of us have grown. I mean, independence have brought us to the level where all of us have grade 3, closer to white. The second panel shows that the disparities are still very heavy. The lower brown color curve is for those with junior certificate. And the last panel shows those with matric. And you can see the distance between whites and blacks there. And it is impossible for blacks to catch up when they have to cross rivers in the way they do in order to just acquire education. Now, when you look at this is a university. That panel shows university. The darker green tells you why it's between whites and blacks. The inner, the one on the left, it's about, give me that mic. This here shows you whites with degrees, a proportion of whites with degrees. And this is the proportion of degrees for blacks. And this is matric, and this is junior certificate, and here is Baby, Bobu, Sase, Sisosu, amongst blacks. Now, if we don't change this is where we are now. With this kind of proportion of the fewer of those without degrees, South Africa cannot go anywhere. Because we need that level of education to lead, that elite must lead in the transformation of the country. This is what the whites have, this is what the blacks have. So this is a big problem. It needs to be attended to. We haven't attended to it in the last 28 years. Is there evidence that we can address it in the next 28? That's the question we must ask ourselves. There must be evidence that it will be addressed. It's not just an exhortation that it should be addressed. There must be a credible plan on the ground that says this will happen. It cannot happen when children are crossing rivers in the way they are doing. So, we are living with Korea in South Africa, amongst whites. And somewhere in Starkveld, in the Eastern Cape, where we have that bar, Baby Bobu, Sase, Sisosu. Now, when we look at the quantum of qualifications in South Africa, that is the quantum we have, which is that narrow thing that is the green there. It's too small to make a step change. So we have a lot of budget. 20% of our budget goes to education, but it doesn't yield the results. 28 years into democracy. Now, you see, when students went on and said fees must fall, you were there as the ruling party and the EFF, and you destroyed that movement of the students who were saying fees must fall. They didn't say for whites, for blacks. They said fees must fall for everyone. That was a nation-building statement. And that was a social compact that was beginning at the university. Today we are crying we want social compact. We ignored it. We didn't dip our buckets where the water was. That was fresh. Because it is only in those spaces, when you look at index of integration in South Africa, it is only in those spaces where prospects for integration occur. Instead, we walked away from it. It was the year of the election. We went there and had local government elections and destroyed that. Now, the Afrikaners are building their own university. The nation-building project is teetering. Whereas if we agreed that fees must fall for everyone, the only price that the student had to pay would be, what country do you aspire to have? For 15 years, if we worked on that project, for these students to say what country they aspire to have, in another 15 years, this country would be different. Instead, we said, fees for the poor, fees for... And when we called for fees for the poor, we actually disappointingly provided a policy that doesn't work, as though we don't come from South Africa. We know that 60% of fathers say they are married to 30% of mothers. And if you have that kind of situation, who is paying the fees? Because the schizophrenic father is not there. And this mother is put under scrutiny to pay for the child because there is an assumed father or an assumed husband. And it actually creates conditions for the abuse of women and abuse of children. We'll never get out of this if we can't start nitpicking and failing to identify where things should happen. Our policies are totally misplaced from the conditions in South Africa. They are nice on paper, but at the implementation level, they are totally misplaced. Now, well, what does society say about the priorities? We want water, they want employment, they want electricity to go down. Of course, there's no electricity. Don't worry about it now. Now, education is number 15. So ourselves as society are culpable to have education as priority number 15. And it is not surprising that at the height of fees must fall, society was ignoring the creation of an elite army, intellectually, that would take South Africa out of where it is. Unless we make this priority, we are not going to go anywhere. And politicians who you are not going to go and tell them that I'll give you education when they say they want water. Of course, you don't even give them the water after all. Now, the problem that we have is that, Oh, I've forgotten that one. I drive an automatic car. Can I get the... Yes, I get this one. I want to come here and show you the disaster that is happening. And this disaster is not going away. And your programs, your economic recovery and reconstruction plan is not going to resolve this thing at all. I have to say it to yourselves right away. You see, this is children who are aged 25 to 34, 15 to 24. In 2008, this was the number that was employed. You see that block that goes that way. And for these ones, this was the number that was employed. By 2021, that number had reduced in absolute numbers. 1 million less by 2022 were employed in the 25 to 34. And 700,000 less were employed in the age group 15 to 24. So the cat, I've seen it. When I was growing up in Lesotho, when there was no milk, the cat starts eating its kittens. And that's what we are doing. Now, of course, here at 35 to 34, there is just a marginal increase, and the marginal increase in the employment at 45 to 54. For those of us who are 55 to 64, well, there's also an increase. But the unemployment this side is increasing drastically, and it's unabated. So the policies that you are designing that are in your proposals are not going to solve that problem at all. We have modeled it. We know. It's a laundry list, to say the least, what we have prepared for discussion. It's a laundry list of inputs which says nothing about what the outcomes will be. It doesn't say anything about that. Neither did the NDP, nor did the RDP. So 28 years into democracy, we have a situation where the main problem of the youth, as we see it in this multidimensional poverty, is driven by lower educational attainment at 35%. That's what drives their poverty, the youth. And adults, nobody as an adult employed in the household. That comes to 16%. And that employment or education, and that accounts for 66% of what drives poverty in South Africa. Yet when you go and campaign, you campaign about we'll give you water, we'll give you energy, we'll give you all these assets. They're important, they're good, but the drivers of poverty are there. That's 66%. That's what we must be seizing us and making us sleepless every night. Yes, water, yes, certainly. But that's not the key thing that drives poverty. And that is generational. So we are producing generational poverty over the last 28 years. Now, Baroness Shafik talks about stages of investment. And these stages of investment, she has published a book called What Do We Owe Each Other? And in her book, What We Owe Each Other, she says the investment is here in grade R and grade 1. And then here we pay taxes. And there we get pensions. This is the demographic profile of everyone. But here we don't invest. Well, of course, we spend money, but we don't invest. And we spend substantial money for children in schools. But that's not an investment because our choices of how we get them to school, how they get trained by teachers, I mean, teachers go on strike instead of teaching children. And these children start migrating to urban areas, and whites get all the employment. Our teachers stay there in Soweto with empty infrastructure. We have not prioritized children here. So they grow and they don't pay taxes. And they grow and they get pensions. Now, I'll show you this here now. No. You press. Just press, yes. And when you press, it will do something. You see? It has done that. You see now, here it's a university. Minister Blade Nzimande and Minister Mantashi, when they were Secretary Generals, didn't like what I said about this graph. And I think it's important for us as technicians take the time to explain issues to politicians, because if we don't, then they don't get the right message. You see this graph here. This graph shows in the 80s and the 70s the proportion of blacks who attained degrees and the proportion of whites who attained degrees, the Indians and the coloreds. When the graph goes up that way, you know you are improving. When it goes down that way, it means you are losing. Now, the graph of blacks, the 80s, is losing. And the coloreds. Here, for every one white person that graduated, it was almost the same proportion amongst blacks. If you look at this gradient here, the gradient here is the same as the gradient there. But now, at this point, for every one black person graduating, there are 6 whites graduating. That's the ratio. Not because whites are doing better, but because these students don't have the necessary support at university. They sleep in toilets. And that's why they said fees must fall. And their compatriots who are white and Indian, when they said fees must fall, we went there and destroyed this. So our policies must be cognizant of the national agenda. The national agenda is making South Africa work. The Constitution said non-racial, non-sexist. But once we do that, the Afrikaners will have their own schools, and that national project will fail. So, next. So, this is where that investment, are you moving? Oh, you are running out of gas. No, that one is fine where you are. You see that graph there? This is our degree of investment, and it's very small. And it cannot create a generational transition. When I was, you see, China here. China says, what will happen to China's youth in generations to come? This is how China will move. The generation that will be excluded will be that small. And that's the generation that will be included in the future in China. That's the big one. This is European countries, very small. South Africa hopes to be there at 39, growing to 49. I doubt if it will, given what we have as education. So future generations are likely to resemble the European kind of a decline in terms of a better generational maintenance. So our discussions must really be about these challenges. Of course, there is an election of delegates at the end. But what are we asking those delegates to do? These are the challenges that they must stand up and say, we will do the following. This was Kliptown Station. This is what it is now. We know it. I mean, the rail has been eaten brick by brick. I mean, and cable stolen. You know, in Canada, the railways in Canada were converted into communication technology systems. So you could talk on the phone using the rail line, that line. Now, why is it impossible to know where the line has been broken when actually it can be technologically connected to a point, XY coordinate on that, and know that that cable is being stolen now? And then deploy the police to go and arrest the bastards. We have to go and say, where will they break? No, this thing, it's the technology, it's changed from a rail manager to a communications manager. And anything that happens on that line, they know. Much as we should know here. rather than say, go and get the guards. No, you just need to deploy that technology, and you will know this cable theft will stop. Because electricity is a communications line. And any sector of it that gets broken must trigger on a cell phone, and this guy is grabbed instantaneously. High-speed cars and everything. This thing can be solved. But when lions are fighting amongst themselves, the buffalo walks and goes. This is energy. Load shedding. Now, where there is a problem here in South Africa is we are the only country probably in the world that has massive pensions. Massive pensions. With these pensions, the countries that are sophisticated, such as the United States and all those others that are developed, they borrow from the pensions. We, those who are developing, borrow from emergency, from markets. Why does South Africa choose to go and borrow from the markets when it can borrow from our pensions? At rates that do not need ratings agencies. We don't need that. We can borrow from our pensions. We have 3 trillion. We have 3 trillion rands in assets that we can borrow from. Yet we choose to go to ratings agencies and borrow from them. Of course, when you steal, like you have done, I can't risk my pension in your hands. Unfortunately, I can't. So we need to cleanse ourselves. The catharsis must start here, so that we can borrow for our pensions. ESCOM is no issue at all if it borrows from our pensions, because it will be at an interest rate that is determined, and we'll have the evergreen, ever normal granary. What we are doing in practice is to create and generate the tragedy of the commons. And not only the tragedy of the commons, but also the tragedy of the private. You see, the UK, because all these guys wanted to graze their cattle. And when you have cattle, you also want to have more cattle so that you can have access to grazing. Now that creates the tragedy of the commons, because all of you want to graze and you don't care about the Lukhulole. Now, the UK started enclosures, and it was based on the theory and philosophy of the tragedy of the commons. So now, unfortunately, our strategies are also the tragedy of the private, simultaneously the tragedy of the private and the tragedy of the commons. We are not moving our policies towards the center here, where the curve, the area under the curve is maximized around here, so that we bring, and that's what the social compact must be, to move the poor from where they are, to move the rich from where they are, and then we meet somewhere here, and the area under the curve maximizes. Unlike now, we are all operating in this corner and that corner, and the area under the curve, which is where wealth is created, is smaller. So we are creating the tragedy of the commons and the private all at the same time. These are the things that we must address. Of course, having done that, we know that gross fixed capital formation in South Africa has been, for 24 quarters, 16 of those quarters were negative, 7 of them were lackluster. That one that looks high is base effects. It's not a real growth, it's just base effects, because we had COVID here. It's like we were falling in a hole, and then you jump out of the hole. You have not climbed the tree yet. The target is to climb the tree. Similarly, in terms of GDP growth, we have done the same. You can see we fell in the ditch here. We jumped just ahead above the ditch. And that's why that growth is so significant. It's not significant. It's a pigmentation of base effects. So is the GDP. At the moment, we are where we are not yet where we were in terms of GDP in 2017. So, if I were to present a portrait of the growth accounting framework and argue where South Africa is at the moment, this portrait suggests that, yes, that portrait. This portrait of the growth accounting framework has two channels. The first channel is labor productivity, the second channel is absorption rate, and the third channel is terms of trade. Here on labor productivity, the capital labor ratio, the factors for production and productivity in South Africa is very low. Here in terms of absorption rate, participation is low, employment is low, creation is low, job creation is low. The demographic dividend is demographic disaster. And the young dependency ratio and elderly dependency ratios are very high. And in terms of trade, we take the coal out of the ground and send it abroad without processing it. And now these days you can't even take it there because the rail line doesn't work. So it's trouble. So what we have in terms of the future of the country is a very debilitating, and as I said, your ERP, RRP document doesn't address a lot of these things. You see, now, this is the price of bread. As statisticians, we measure things in terms of purchasing power parities, and that is the real price of things as though you are in a better economy. And of course, for the price of bread, you can see here in South Africa, bread is cheap. So it is so in Mozambique, and it is so in Cote d'Ivoire, and in Togo, Lomé, and in Senegal, and all this. But it's expensive in Ghana, and it's expensive in Nigeria. So, you say, why in a country that is just divided by a line is bread so expensive and low? When I speak French, I say, Monsieur, manger de pain. The bread price goes down. And I say, I eat bread, the price goes up. This information is very crucial for informing the Africa Continental Free Trade Agreement. Because it says where are the prices high, where the prices are low. And what then has to be done about them in terms of trading. Well beyond speaking French and speaking English. And it has to do with Africa integration agenda. But it's even cheaper in Lesotho and Swaziland because there, the women, I think even the men now, they need their own bread, they produce it. And now when Russia refuses its wheat and so on, they will not be faced by the price shocks that everybody is going to be faced with. So the question of land to produce your own food, very, very crucial. That is the basis of food security. Now, next slide, that one. On the continent, like in Egypt, this is where they sell specialized shops, and they are owned by Egyptians. They are owned by all Egyptians. Here in South Africa, we have private service providers and large shops, and these are owned by white South Africans, not by black South Africans. In Nigeria, private service providers are that big, and these are the ones. So the distribution of goods and services through these outlets in these other countries ensure that there is a bit of equity. In South Africa, there are monopolies. And what is left for Africans is 10.3 plus 8, which is 18. In fact, it is that 11%, which is largely in the public service. So the outlets that we use are monopolized. So where do Africans and coloreds, or the blacks in general, get restored? This is 2011, and 2017 has not changed. So this is what happens on the continent in terms of that distribution of outlets. And you can see South Africa has the largest concentration of this and that. It's white and white here. And blacks are left with very little. That brown, and that white. So when we talk about economic policy, there must be evidence that it will change those. It can't be an economic policy without evidence that says these things will change. And because it's inputs and not outcomes, there's no modeling of the outcomes. We only see the litany of things. They are longer and longer, and because there are many, and the amounts that the president talks about, the minister of finance talks about at parliament, and you applaud, because the sums are big, 200 billion, 100 billion. That's input. It's input. Let us ask the question, what will it deliver? That's the question that you go into this elective conference must answer. What will you deliver given the magnitude of the challenge and including over the last 28 years? This is how South Africa lost the plot. It used to be up here in terms of the blue one, but it lost to Egypt and Nigeria. Not because Egypt and Nigeria were doing something very, very miraculous, but because South Africa actually dropped the ball. This is where we are now against those other two. Now, here is this GDP. Oh, yes, do that GDP one. Yes, that one. You see how South Africa dropped the ball. Okay, let's stop there. Here, we are looking at the price level indices. What does it cost to do anything in South Africa relative to the associated giants of Nigeria and Egypt? Here you see, this is the price levels in Nigeria at 57, and the price level of Egypt at 27, and the price level of South Africa at 72. So if you have that kind of price level, and you have high levels of unemployment, and you have low levels of ownership, what then is your future relative to the other African countries? We actually are not playing to our level because of our faulty economic policies. Next slide. Now, of course, infrastructure is important. Building of infrastructure is important in our task to create jobs. But I tell you, the price level index of machinery and equipment, the purchasing power parity price of that is 131 relative to all these other prices. Very expensive. Of course, we have to buy those machines and rent them and so on. But building them here in South Africa, as we used to, would be the best. Now, this is where you are as local government. Obli KwaZulu-Natal, Matingwani 1, not the second Matingwani who was premier, Matingwani Senzo. Senzo Matingwani, Nkunu, as premier, invited us as SSA and said, can you run an independent survey on satisfaction of citizens in KwaZulu-Natal? I said, Premier, with due respect, I cannot run a provincial citizen satisfaction. I have to run a national one. Because if I run a provincial one, I create disparities in the knowledge base of society. He said, now why are the other provinces not wanting you to do it? I said, I do not know, Premier. I've gone to them, and they said they don't have money, they don't have this, they don't have that. But the election was around the corner. The election was around the corner, and they feared to run this survey. Only Premier Senzo agreed. And he said, if you refuse Statistician General, I'll run it myself. And I said, well, it will lose credibility and it will have negative effects on the entire statistical system. So under duress, I ran this. Now, this is a performance of KwaZulu-Natal Type A, Type B for municipalities. This is how they are performing. Now, as a Minister of Human Settlements, this doesn't augur well for human settlements. The level of disparity of satisfaction in basic services for human settlements is just too dispersed. It's too dispersed. Not satisfied with houses, not satisfied with toilets, not satisfied with... In my house, although, I'm not satisfied with the way Eskom is behaving with electricity, my level of satisfaction with my toilet is around here. And the water, although there was no water yesterday. But it's around here, so it's the toilet and everything. And that makes for a house or a dwelling. And if all of us in those spaces have that, then we have a human settlement. When this is the level of disparity from housing satisfaction to electricity satisfaction, it means the district development model is not working. Or at least in its work, it must challenge this. Because people in housing plan them alone, water plan alone, pellets plan alone, and electricity plan alone. And with the coalition government, this will be very interesting. One of the things that we presented to Matungwan was the coalition governments and the performance and the levels of dissatisfaction across those. So you have to have a national handle on this. And only Stats SA can give you credible figures around levels of satisfaction so that we can resolve the disparity in the planning systems there. And this business of saying there's no money, I mean, how do you then plan? So, now, let me be useful. There is the future. There is a future. We need to start using different metrics, social metrics. What gets done, what gets measured gets done. And we need social metrics to temper the economic metrics and the financial metrics in order that we bring society into the loop. And that means dealing a lot more with social data, a lot more with environment, social, and governance metrics, a lot more influencing, therefore, how investments have to be driven. Because economic data has failed us. The GDP has failed us. And one of the things that we can use, and Stats SA produces it, I produced it since 2013, but government doesn't use it anyway. Something called the Multidimensional Poverty Index. In Costa Rica, in Colombia, they use this Multidimensional Poverty Index to create conditions for social compacts and resolution of serious problems. And this is the direction we have to move in order to make sure that we move forward. I mean, the data is there from 2013. When I showed you what aggrieves the youth, that's based on the Multidimensional Poverty Index. Now, in that space, the bonds, the social bonds, have to be informed by the extent to which multidimensional index, poverty index exists amongst the employed. And in Costa Rica, they use this. Now, by doing so, you will be actually appealing to the ancient Chinese tradition of price regulation, where during the Qing dynasty, they said the ever normal granary. That's where Eskom and Steel, they must be the ever normal granary, so that those who invest on top of that can actually get the economy going. So, the real question is, under the Indula-Meti scenarios, which Indula-Meti scenario are we going to follow? But before I do that, I have to talk about the era of idiots, which was the title of my talk. You see, in 1860, around here, there was 1,500. There was talk about idiots. And idiot, the name idiot, or the word idiot, as a proportion of all words, featured this high. Changed in 1592 and increased. But what was surprising is here in 1871, the word idiot reached higher proportions. And in fact, in South Africa, the census of South Africa, this is a global measure, but the census of South Africa, in the questionnaire, was included lunatics, disabled, and idiots in the census of 1871. So idiots could be measured. Very interesting. Now, as we move into the 21st century, This is where word idiot features. So if you move from there to here, you can see that we are actually entering the era of the idiot. Now, Amartya Sen, the Nobel laureate, talks about human lives. And what we need to do with these human lives is to, oh man, I'm finishing now. Oh, that's a lot of time. 10 minutes, I'll have finished. You see, we need to use these multidimensional poverty indices to build awareness on business in order to have a multidimensional poverty index for business, so that when they do business, they understand who is poor in their area. And this can actually drive our key economic policies so that we can address unemployment, inequality, growth, and development. And this requires a coherent set of policies. I haven't presented to you the 3 scenarios of Indula Mete, but from the Muvango scenario, we have moved to the Gwara scenario in South Africa. The land of disorder, where everything goes. That's where we are now. And everybody is tired of plans. They say, we are tired of planning. Let me say to you that there's never been any planning in South Africa of any meaning. You cannot be tired of a good plan. You'll be tired of bad plans. And that's what has afflicted us. From RDP to GEAR, to NDP, to ASGISA, to 9-point plan, to 14-point plan, to New Dawn, to building better communities together. You no longer know what is a slogan and what is a strategy and what is a plan. Then the RDP, during the RDP time, there were people who were saying RDP loans, lending loans. So we really need to get to the grasp of understanding planning. And that is complex. It's not something that you just exhort. It's not the NDP. The NDP is something that tells you where you want to be. The how of it is intricate, it's complex, it requires highly qualified people to do it. It requires modeling. Now we have left our plan to the National Treasury with their 3-year cycle of MTF. And if you look at this 9 or so things, and you divide 9 by 28 years, you come to 3. And you realize that we are actually planning the expenditure and not development. That's what we are doing. Because we are beholden by MTF and not long-term planning. The mining department, the agriculture department don't come together to think about how the intersection, laws of motion of economics are part of the planning. We don't respect those. So when I look at the main points at SONA and the main points from the State of the Nation, and the main points from Treasury Minister of Finance, they said nothing about jobs, nothing about poverty, and nothing about inequality. If you want to look at those speeches, they say nothing about those in any substantive way to say we'll create so many jobs. That's what we need. The president should not be concerned with a litany of inputs. He must be concerned about saying, my cabinet, my promise to South Africa is 6 million jobs in another 30 years, in another 5 years. It's about this growth. Now go and make it happen. That's what he must talk to targets, not inputs. Inputs, you get lost in the rabbit holes. And the bureaucrats are very good at putting you in those rabbit holes. So if you look at the net effect of what the minister's speech was, basically his speech, when you model it, and the presidency targets, it only says you will be 4.5 trillion by 2030. It also says that the jobs that will be created is just 1 million by 2030. It says that unemployment rate will be 30%. Now it will be higher because of what has happened. And by own admission, Treasury growth rate is 1.6. And poverty will be higher. Compared to what Business for South Africa says, those group of people that came, they say we can grow the economy to 8 trillion. They say that we can grow the unemployment, lower the unemployment rate. And when we look at that with our modeling, we tend to coincide with Business. But we have a path to that. Business for South Africa has not provided a path of how they get there. So they have to be asked, how are you going to get there? But the targets are good. And that, I think, should be the basis on which we should be enabled. In fact, Gauteng, growing Gauteng together, gives similar targets to the ones that we have modeled, of a higher employment in Gauteng. But if the Treasury doesn't come to the party, Gauteng plan will come to nothing. So we've come with a 6-pillar policy framework, which looks at the macroeconomic framework, social policy, micro policy, trade and industry, private sector, provincial growth plans. With that plan, we are saying it is possible. Go to the next one. It is possible to grow the economy. With a base of 2%, the business as usual will give you only 0.7%. And then when you add the microeconomic reforms that you have in your documents, they will only give you 0.27 percentage points. All that work that you have done will only give you 0.27 percentage points. And then you will be growing at 2.7%. You have spent a lot of work. That's energy wasted. Now, the next part is the trade and industry, which is part of the microeconomic reforms. It will only give you 0.38 percentage points. The key issue is macro reforms, which is the Treasury and the Reserve Bank. They have to come to the party in a particular way, which means we have to move from the mainstream economics to heterodox economics in order to make our 5% growth rate possible. That's the task. Focus on the targets, work backwards on the methods, and agree on an economic policy framework that has to be followed. Thank you very much.
I know, delegates, you can do better than that. Delegates, yes, you can do better than that. Thank you very much, Ntateli Hutla. Thank you so much. Comrades, umphago lo ke mofago for our commissions, particularly the Commission for Economic Transformation, can make recommendations on how best we can propose the review of our policies. So I hope you were taking notes, and then you have noted the points for discussion to improve the situation before it's too late. Thank you very much. Without further ado, comrades, can you please stand up and just stretch? Please, comrades. Ali batlu stretcher. Ali batlu stretcher. Anifuna stretcher. Marang bona abanye sebalala. I saw some who were dozing off here. Oh, Pina. Siyabonga maqabane kaThambo. Without further ado, let me, before I hand over, let me acknowledge one of our own, the former CEO of Salga, who is now the Secretary to Parliament. We are very proud of him. Olile George. Where are you, Comrade Koli? Oh, Adikbun. All right. Congratulations once more. We are very proud of you. Comrade delegates, I am now going to give the platform to our DRC Deputy Regional Coordinator, Comrade Loyiso Masugu, to give us credentials, and hand over to our PEC, the convener of the PEC deployees, Comrade Dr. Khosiensu Ramokhopa, after Comrade Loyiso, for him then to facilitate the process going forward. Amandla! And thank you very much for being such a good delegates and good audience. Amandla! High discipline. High morale. Thank you, comrades.
Bring it closer. Sifuni woman on top. Sifuni woman on top. Sifuni woman on top. Okay. I'll take it. Sifuni woman on top.
I can go sit down, eh?
Sifuni woman on top.
Amandla. 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 Viva ANC, viva. Raikopane, Johannesburg, Raikopane. Raitie, Johannesburg, Raitie. Comrades, I'm going to request for your maximum attention, because conference has arrived at a stage where it is meant to take constitutionally binding decisions. And those decisions have to do with policy choices, has to do with our orientation when we go to the National Policy Conference, and our attitude when we go to the national conference. Conference also has to do a bit of reflection on some of the most substantive questions that were raised in the earlier sessions. Because Comrade Makura, Comrade Vondo, Comrade the former Statistician General, our alliance partners, they've begun to elaborate and characterize the nature of the problem that is confronting us. So conference has a duty to respond to those questions. And for conference to do that, it must be properly constituted by those delegates to conference who carry the legal mandate from their branches. So it's not a free-for-all. It is those who went through the pain of ensuring that we convene constitutionally compliant branch general meetings to choose delegates, make our choices on who must constitute part of the leadership collective here in the region and the province. And it is that cohort of delegates who must then carry conference going forward. And for us to be able to discharge and prosecute that mandate, it is a requirement to know who is in the meeting. And that exercise of determining who is in the meeting and answering the question if these are the right people to be in the meeting, in the ANC we call it credentials. And credentials is a closed session. So there are no friends to conference. There will not be media. It is only those who are meant to be in conference. So I'm going to ensure that we don't soil, undermine the credibility of the exercise that we are about to undertake and endanger the life of conference. I'm going to ensure that we do it in a very mechanistic fashion, that everyone is going to leave the room. And then only, can I make the point? So that we get to know, comrades, so that we get to place our guests at an appropriate place, and we get to know that those who will be moving for adoption or raising issues around matters, not just on credentials, but issues that requires adoption, are people who've got full voting rights in conference. So I'm going to request, comrades, that we use this door to my right. We get out, and those who have tags that are saying voting delegates, Comrade Tolo and the security team and the administrators of the ANC will then invite people in. They'll do those checks, and then we'll also invite our guests to come in. And just to apologize to the media in advance, for that exercise, the media will be excused so that we get to discharge the business of conference. So can I ask that we decant the room? Where's Tolo? Yeah? And then, no. You can see.